When large jobs require moving massive amounts of snow, get the work done quickly and efficiently with the Western Pile Driver and all-new Pile Driver XL pusher plows, both featuring trace edge technology. These pushers scrape down to the pavement with an advanced cutting-edge system that has independent 2-foot sections that move vertically, oscillate, and trip. Get more jobs done faster with the Western Pile Driver lineup of pusher plows.
Mike Bott from Frost Solutions, one of the owners of the company. What we do is provide a mini weather station to give you a tailored forecast to those particular locations so you know where and when and what to do in those parts of town. You know there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different ways that people can experience tremendous value having a technology like this.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey with your host, Dave Westcott. The Entrepreneurial Journey is a weekly podcast that streams live every Tuesday at 9:15 a.m. Pacific on Dave's YouTube channel and LinkedIn profile. Now here's Dave with this week's episode.
Good morning and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey. I'm your host, Dave Westcott, and I have with me today special guest Christian Reed, founder and CEO of REEKON Tools. Christian, good morning.
Morning, Dave. Thanks for having me on the show. Happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this show for months. Since the first time we talked, I was looking forward to this show. I got to ask, is the woodworking background, is that a screensaver or are we actually in your shop?
Yep, we're in our shop. So I think we learned pretty early on, social media has, been an immensely valuable tool for us to grow as a company. And then over time, as we've grown and expanded the facilities, we actually made a dedicated area for both demos and, real world applications. So the closer we can replicate our environment to a real construction site, the better, and certainly serves a dual purpose of authentic background for podcasts and video calls.
I love it. I love it. You've even got the scheduling clipboard back there in the background. You guys thought of everything. I love it. All right. So this is an awesome show. So you are a lifelong builder and maker. You graduated from MIT with a degree in mechanical engineering. You served in the Army as an engineer officer. What led you to become an entrepreneur? What was that moment where you're like, hey, I'm going out on my own?
Yeah, I think I've always been very entrepreneurial by nature. And I guess the way I think about people who start companies usually fall into 2 categories. One, people who are passionate either about the idea of being entrepreneurial or the specific industry they're serving. And then 2, what I call more of an MBA entrepreneur, where I want to start a company. I don't care what it is or what it does. I just like the idea of making it with it. So I think I fell into the category of probably could have done either with it. And again, a lot of this now is speaking in retrospect, but the amount I learned at my first job post-military really gave me the tools of how to develop technology in a product, which again, always very arrogantly coming out of school, college, like, oh, I can do anything, but until you're really in the weeds of it, you don't really understand all the complexities of it. So I really consider that experience my second education, but always being ready for when the opportunity struck. And I think that time really struck in 2019 when myself and my co-founder were working on a side project. Realized it had the legs to turn not only into a side project, but a full company, and then haven't looked back in the past 5 years since then with it. So I guess always very entrepreneurial and always ready for that opportunity when it struck to make sure I had the tools and was well prepared for when it happened, and knowing that I would, like to do both, which is I think the ideal state of many, which is to be passionate both about being an entrepreneur and passionate about the industry we're serving, where I've always been obsessed with building and making things with it. So really a killer combo, and helps you get over the inevitable peaks and valleys of working at a startup pretty quickly.
Okay, I love that. That's a fantastic answer. The thing that I'm thinking of is, like, I see a light bulb, it's above your head, and all of a sudden it turns on. What was that moment for you? What was it? What was that perfect opportunity that just spoke to you and said, now is the time?
Yeah, I think it was really an evolution of building things where when you're in high school, you use a lot of woodworking tools, things you find at Home Depot, Lowe's. My father was very into woodworking, had plenty of tools from 1970s Craftsman tools to, whatever, Dremel, I think was one of my first tools I got in 5th or 6th grade. So the evolution of that takes, many turns. Or in college, you have access to all these 3D printers, CNC machines, worked at a 3D printing company post-school, but it's always that theme of how people make things, how people make physical things. So
Yeah.
the opportunity to make a product that could be sold in a Home Depot, could have an elemental appeal to the weekend warrior building something around their house, to the professional who's using it in construction, one of the largest industries in the world, was
Yep.
really what put the pieces together. And again, speaking now with 5 years of insights, but at the time, I think when we started in 2020, it was really the idea of making a tool to help people make things and do so in a very accessible way. It wasn't a tool that had a prerequisite of a mechanical engineering degree, years of training. It was something that you can get up and use. And whether it's helping you reduce errors in the short term or increasing speed, if it's something you do every day with it, I think that was the real appeal and something that's really inspired the mission of REEKON Tools since then.
Okay, we've set the stage. What is the tool?
Yeah, so REEKON makes a variety of measurement tools for a construction site. So it certainly can be generalized more to data capture, but I think the easiest way to personify it is we make digital tape measures. So tools that everyone is familiar with, very flexible for a wide variety of use cases on construction projects, big and small, and really the back end as well as software of what to do with those measurements once you collect them with it. And everyone here, I'm sure, has used and handled a tape measure before with it, and we made both a digital version to accurately pull the measurements, display them on a screen on the device, and then share it over Bluetooth to basically anywhere, whether it's a spreadsheet, an ordering form, a database, and everything in between with it. So I think that's really been the theme of our roadmap, and consisted of quite a number of hardware products to capture, execute, and label data on the construction site, and software to make sure it gets to the right spot on the back end.
I love that. And I think that a digital tape measure is an amazing thing. So basically, I come out, I go, I buy your product, I go hit up the Home Depot or your website, buy it online. I go out, I get the tape measure, and now I'm on the job site and I'm still pulling the tape out, and it's giving me a read measurement that says this was 4 feet 3 inches.
Yep. Yep.
And now through Bluetooth, I can shoot that directly to whatever I want. I can put that into a Word document, an Excel sheet. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yep. And I think it's split into transactional of, like, if I'm cutting a 2x4 for a stud, I only care about that measurement for a very short amount of time. So the big use case we see there is I have a dude on the roof who's taking measurements, someone else on the saw on the other side of the job site, and then they have a list on their phone of all the measurements that need to be cut with it. So that's a very simple transactional relationship of sharing measurements. One where there's a higher sense of permanence for the measurements is, say I'm replacing windows. So I go to a house, I'm from Renewal by Anderson, and I need to measure all the windows in a house to replace them all with it. Obviously, then you have some more need to keep that data stored with it. So in that case, I would take all the measurements, organize them into windows, and be able to share them to the manufacturer to actually put the window, make them, and then install them later on with it. So in that case, the database aspect of it becomes a lot more valuable, but both of which are examples of sharing measurements over Bluetooth and doing things people are already doing, right? So this is really just replacing paper processes or less optimized, like you said, spreadsheets where everyone has their hacky way of doing it. And our idea is just to try to clean it up and reduce those very small errors that only equate to seconds or minutes per day, but very quickly add up to hours or days on a monthly or yearly basis.
I love it. I think it's incredible. So let me get this right. I want to make sure I've got it. I go ahead and I'm on the ladder. It's a windy day. It's a little shaky out there. And I've got to measure this monstrous house full of windows. And I'm like, gosh, my job today is measuring windows. And I wasn't able to go into the house, so I had to do it from the outside. So I'm measuring the windows. And now, instead of getting up there and holding my pen in my mouth and scribbling it down, okay, that was 9 inches by 3.5. And I'm sitting there and I'm writing them down. And then I get off the ladder and I go back to the truck and I'm like, frick, I can't read my writing. I got to do it again. In this case scenario, what we're doing is we're measuring, it's giving us a digital footprint. I can text it, I can email, I can do whatever I want with it with Bluetooth connectivity, and I get my measurements right there, accurate, right on the spot.
Yep. And even better, if it goes to your phone, anyone else with an internet connection can see it in real time using our software. So if you're saving measurements on a ladder in your phone and the project manager's in the truck drinking his warm coffee, he can open his laptop or tablet and see in real time as the measurements are captured, who took them, and creating a higher sense of accountability that we never, of course, like to finger point, but the very practical answer is diagnosing, especially as fellow business owners and those concerned with efficiencies of you can do a lot of stuff with data, but only if the data exists in the first place with it. So having an accurate record of when measurements were captured, who they are, and to make sure they're actually doing it too, right? If you have 20 teams in the field, it would be certainly helpful to have a dashboard view as to
Absolutely.
what the progress is of what they're doing with it. So there's a lot of direct benefits from the measurements themselves, as well as more analytical data that can be captured and really set the stage for the hot topics of the day, using AI to find productivity gaps in your workflow and otherwise. But that's all predicated, of course, on having the data in the first place versus imagining what actually is happening in the field.
I love this. You know what? I think it's incredible. I can't tell you how many times an estimator comes back from estimating a project and there's something wrong. Something is just captured incorrectly. Something is transposed. And one of the biggest things is, you've got those two little symbols that go at the end of the measurement, and it's either feet or inches. And how many times does that get done incorrectly? How many times does a measurement get done? Materials are ordered incorrectly. And this is really solving that problem for the contractor, for, like you said, the weekend warrior building their own deck, getting it done. Like, this is an amazing product. I absolutely love it. I have one. I love it. I'm going to go do some estimates this afternoon, and you better believe it's the only thing I'm taking with me. So I'm a believer in the products that you guys have and have built. What led you to create this? What was the light bulb moment? What was the, hey, this is a tool and I'm going to build it?
Yeah, I think, outside of the original idea, which has, evolved since to many other products, I think the really core philosophy we looked at is, how do we serve the construction space, being a very broad space, but the parallel I always like to imagine, and this alone is certainly not a reason to do something, but when you walk back down a Best Buy aisle, it looks wildly different than it did 2 years ago, and would be a huge nostalgia to see like a video recording of someone walking into Best Buy in 2010 and be like, wow, remember when phones looked like that and computers looked like that, where Home Depot would be near identical, right? Sure, drills have a slightly different battery on them, but I can promise 10, 12 years ago, if someone looked at a Home Depot walkthrough today, there probably would have been nothing outside of maybe like a Nest thermostat and a Ring doorbell that you wouldn't be able to tell with it. So I think the absence of solutions in the space, and knowing that we've made so much progress across other technology, I think more so than highlight that you can't make tools for construction, is that no one has figured out the magic formula. And the magic formula to us is taking these advances in technology, but still being able to beat the shit out of products, right? It needs to be DeWalt as well as Apple. And I think too many products, and I have a nice chart I like to use in presentations of, if you have a well-designed product that's or a handsome looking product like Apple, very Apple-esque, minimalistic, it winds up in a sharper image catalog despite it being designed for construction with it. Where for us, it was very important to have that balance of both of them with it and make it very accessible. So it has to speak to the tradesperson who is depending on the reliability of it, but then ordering them to our standard, which is an order of magnitude benefit to speed, error reduction, workflow, or safety. So something 10 or 20% better, probably not going to switch my, battery powered 20 volt platform to get a drill that's, is 10% better than the other drill with it, right? So all of our products are things that are, serving an order of magnitude benefit to a professional, bring this new functionality to a job site, and very accessible. You shouldn't need to have a high educational requirement, training overhead to use it. It's something that you can use and be distributed across the job site. So it's not a single robot on $100 million project. It's everyone on the job site having a digital data capture tool and being able to leverage that in more global ways for capturing data, logging information about the job site with you, just as easily as a weekend warrior who is just collecting measurements measurements. And now instead of, the classic, I think, example you gave, Dave, of a 2x4 you're scrambling for that has all your measurements written on it as you're
Yes.
climbing down the ladder off the roof, you have something on your hip that stores, 1,000 measurements on the side of it. So I think that's really what's driven our mission and how we evolve and think about tools going forward. That there's, like any company, there's always distractions of things to make, but if we're not providing that order of magnitude benefit to a professional, then it's probably not something that we're looking to explore in the short term, at least.
I love it. What's next on the horizon? Are you creating new products?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a full engineering team based here in Boston, and the shop, for all the chaos and construction site around me, our desk part of the office is littered with prototypes and things that we're making to really explore the same theme. There's never, construction being a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's no one size solution fits all with it. So I think a lot of our hardware side is explore these different solutions. How do we enable more data capture faster and, to the accuracy needed to be able to order parts and materials against it. And then on the software side, how to connect it and use it all usefully, because having a ton of data is useful. But for example, if I had a list of 80 measurements, but I had no idea if they referred to a 2x4, a piece of decking, a piece of molding with it, it's not particularly useful. So a lot of our software exploration side has been, how do we add context to these measurements so that, it really is an automatic process of, if I measure a window and a door, when I look at my phone, I have a picture of a window of a door, the measurements labeled on it, and I'm able to export it into a spreadsheet with all those attributes. So that's the full workflow, and a lot of clever and creative solutions we're exploring to work on to really progress this roadmap further and make it, even more distinguished from what the equivalent is now, which is just buying a $20 tape measure and writing down or remembering the measurement.
I love it. You guys are killing it. You don't have a one of these with you, do you?
Yeah, I can grab one over here. Pop off for a second. All right, here we go. Yeah, so we got the T1 in my hand over here with it. So this is what's going to display the measurement on the screen. And you can see we have, again, a couple of variants now with it, but this was our first digital tape measure we made with it. And you can see, just off the bat, the challenges of making something new is you have to make a lot of assumptions. Like here we added a handle to it. Where does the battery go? We have an entirely separate screen from the live display to show you any measurement that you save with it. So a lot of engineering and thought that goes into making the products. And then our first product was a miter saw accessory, which clamps onto the back of a miter saw and displays the measurement on it. So a lot of these product complexity, outside developing the technology, is what is a form factor that both looks well and does the classic trick of being able to slam it on concrete. That's the trade show routine of like, oh, how durable is it as you just chuck it. And of course, trade shows are giant concrete floors with it, but I think that really drives the point home that these aren't fragile toys. These are just as durable as they are flashy with the lasers and technology integrated into it.
Wow, I love that. I love how you just tossed it over your shoulder with no thought at all. Like, hey, this bad boy is going to take the punishment.
Practice that routine before you.
That's awesome. So it's durable. It clips on my belt. It also has a holster component. And now I've got my measurements. I'm taking them. I'm good. Any thought of, and this is just me randomly thinking here, but any thought of any kind of laser measurement in the future?
Yep, I think that's something we're exploring. There are many ways to capture a linear 1D measurement with it, and I think across the board we look at all dimensions, right? From 3D, where you need to get the context of an entire room, to 1D, I'm cutting a specific material with it, and lasers are absolutely useful for if I'm doing a piece of crown molding, and again, a classic ladder example. Like a lot of the other benefits of digital is all these are done with one hand. I can save a measurement with one hand, so it really leads to the safety factor, because as well as anyone who's done home improvement projects, like a lot of people, professionals aside, in home improvement will take the fastest way to do something. So if it's a little unsafe for me to lean over the ladder to get the measurement without hopping back down, repositioning it, probably going to do that, right? Again, not the best practice, but we've all been guilty of doing it. So really having these accessible features helps, with the safety aspect quite a bit as well. And lasers are no exception of, being non-contact between two adjacent surfaces to get the measurement between.
I love the product. I think you guys are doing a great job. So you guys are based in Boston. Are you guys Bruins fans?
Yep, Bruin. More Patriots in the hate. Personally, I guess football's always been a bit bigger for me, but Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox. Boston's a sports city, right? That right size of, I think Boston is still less than 1 million people, so it's definitely a very intimate city. And for us as a startup, a huge pool of talent just based on how many schools, startups, and diversified companies are in the area
Right.
with it. So it's been a really cool place to spend the last 15 years.
Yeah, great place. I mean, you came from MIT, you've got Harvard, you've got University of Boston, like you got a lot of great schools, you got a lot of great talent to pull from. I'm a big Bruins fan. I love the Bruins. They
Yeah,
got
good,
they got
good,
to
good.
they got to turn it around here. We had a few problems on the bench.
Shake off the rust.
That's right. We got to make a couple of changes there. But so you're building the business. What did you run into that you didn't expect along the way, and how did you solve the problem?
Yeah, I guess the two big ones that come to mind. I mean, as a startup or running a business, and I call it a startup despite, we have no external capital, so we're completely bootstrapped. All of our, growth has been fueled by actually selling products with it. But we try, within reason, to operate like a venture-backed startup, meaning that any profit we make is reinvested in growing the company and working on new products, just because of how we envision the future with it. But I think that creates an interesting paradigm where we're always trying to balance the right now we need to make money, cash flow to keep the company running, with the future we're trying to make an investment in the future of making software, which at this point we've been giving out for free as we've tried to develop it. So that's hundreds of thousands of dollars of developer resources, cloud time, server that we've reinvested in the business to make a platform that eventually could be lucrative and grow the business. But it's always you know less than predictable situation of how to balance, like, we need to maintain cash to grow, to pay the
Yep.
employees, run the business, buy inventory, all the normal fun stuff a hardware business has to deal with, versus how much of that can we devote to the future of things that will make money 2 or 3 years down the road with it. So I think that creates a series of challenges. And I think the same thing every small business owner deals with, that when we first started, like, despite doing a $2 million Kickstarter campaign, couldn't get a dime from a bank in, like, a loan or a line of credit with it, right? Because, like, hey, you're not 2 years old. Okay, then we're 2 years old. It's like, oh, well, he had a profitable year. It's like, well, we deferred the revenue for a pre-order to the next year, so 1 year shows a loss even though we made X amount of money with it. Well, it's like, no, sorry, if the taxes are showing this, it can't go on with it. So there are a lot of things that we optimize, because we don't have investors. We don't need to make our P&L look pretty to appease an outsider, because we're trying to grow the business with it. But
Right.
financial institutions that are blinders on, looking at that as like the holy gospel, it sometimes makes it a bit more difficult to do things every business owner needs, right? Lines of capital, working credit to
Yep.
be able to grow and expand, get more inventory if we know we're going to sell a bunch during the holidays with it. So I think that, combined with supply chain issues, which it seems like in the past 5 years, done everything from containers getting stuck in the Suez Canal, to electronic shortages, to manufacturers going out of business, to fires burning down critical component factories. Like, I can't believe the depths we've had to go to on the supply and manufacturing side of
Really.
things. So that's something I think every business deals with. But as a small business, it's been I guess a testament to the engineering and operational talent on the team to deal with those, because each one of those individually could have been a killer and a business killer. And I think having the resiliency to be able to push through those, deal with the month and a half we've been out of stock because of random issues, and some of them are just beyond our control, right? Like, unless you're able to take macroeconomic conditions and correlate them to 5 levels down, which I don't think even the biggest companies can do super accurately, it's just like a very unavoidable situation. So I think those have been kind of the two on my mind. Again, it's a startup, right? Everything's a
Yeah.
problem, but those have been two of the more painful ones I think we've had to deal with, and definitely not going close to disaster, but been like, man, that gone, once slightly left or slightly right, it would have been toast for us with it. So that always, keeps you sharp on the outlook.
What do you do to deal with the stress of, startup, cash flow? I mean, like you said, fires now, potentially tariffs going to impact costs and business. What do you do to relieve that stress?
Yeah, I guess, and the reason I mentioned earlier about why I was so keen on, being an entrepreneur, but only was doing as some, like, I always knew I was passionate about being an entrepreneur, but not taking the quote unquote MBA entrepreneur approach of, like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to start any company I can to make money, where I was very keen and disciplined about only doing a company that I was obsessed with as well with it. So I think having those two, I just don't get stressed, right? To me, there's no negative outcome that can come out of this company with it, right? Both fiscally, like not having any outside investors. It doesn't matter if we sell a company for $5 or $100 million, we're going to make money in some way with it. And that's great. I think smart, talented people have a lot of places they can make money with it. So that hasn't been a concern for me. But I think just the idea of like, it's what I love doing, right? If I sold the company, I'd want to do the same thing again. If the company went out of business, I could have never in my wildest dreams expected to learn as much in this 5-year period as I did with it. So it's certainly, when you deal with those, and I think the reason I mention them is because they're less glamorous side of things, right? We deal with a lot of technology problems, but that's fun and interesting, right? Because you're making a product versus these things are like you need the business to run, but no one, or very, very few people like to, spend their days buried in the, computer spreadsheets, numbers, haggling with, established banks and businesses. That's the least fun part of my job. But I think the way you deal with the valleys of that are inevitable in any startup or small business of any size with it is just having that the passion is what drives me through, knowing that we make something unique, we make something that's impactful to people, and of course just scratching the surface on what's possible, reaching the total addressable market for what we're working with it. But I think that passion and energy is what kind of saves over the stress, along with just balancing your life, right? Spending time with family, exercising, and as of recent, being a lot more disciplined about schedule with it, where before I think you have just more flexibility, and as the company grown and progressed, I've had to become a lot tighter with what gets done in what period, less BSing and scrolling on TikTok throughout the day with it. So I think that balance has made it a lot more manageable, and just in general, stress is accomplishable just because it's something I'm obsessed with, right? There's nothing I'd rather be doing than this, and knowing that and anyone else in this space will have to match this level of excitement and passion to come anywhere close to what we're doing, just because of how much energy we have for it. So I think that definitely helps keep stress to a minimum, and just hasn't really been a significant concern throughout the journey, and something we've been fortunate to experience so far.
You mentioned several things, which has spurred several questions.
Yeah.
I don't often hear people mention what I'll call TAM, total addressable market.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, that's not something that's often even brought up or thought of. And I think that is really, really critical in business planning, business growth, especially on the sales side of things, right? Like, we have to understand what that TAM is. Why is that important, and how do you use that to your benefit?
Yeah, I think for us, the most quantifiable way, and may not relate to all businesses, is that it's always been really interesting, the idea of making a tool that does everything, right? REEKON has a level, a tape measure, an angle finder, right? And going very wide, versus Tim, to an extent, kind of forces you to go deep in one area as well, which is textbook, small business advice, right? Find your expertise, excel in that, and then go wider later on with it, with very, very limited exceptions. That's a textbook way for a business to grow with it, of develop that expertise very deep in one area, completely own it, then you can decide to conquer adjacent to it. So I think when we think of TAM, it's very much related to, if we make a tape measure, and a tape measure is by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude the most sold measuring tool, does it really make sense to make an angle finder, which might be super unique but has a order of 3 or 4 orders of magnitude less than a tape measure? Or does it make sense to make a different tape measure that's maybe optimized for a roofer and can extend to 35 feet versus 25 feet with it? So I think the TAM, outside of starting a business, of course, I think we had several justifications for construction is huge. There's tons of people in the space with it, space absence of technology. So there are a lot of signs that I was good with it. And I think, TAM today is a lot more of a focus on which products are the most lucrative to make. And if they're successful, what is the total impact they could have on customers they serve with it? And, who else is in the space that we're competing against with it? So looking at tape measures where, they're selling, hundreds of millions per year with it, billions of dollars of revenue with it. And we have a product that, is 10 times as expensive being digital with it, plus, extra lifetime value on the software side of things with it is, very keen for us, both for initially evaluating like, hey, this is the right space to get into, and then now making product decisions of which part of the market is beneficial to target. And then later on, nice because, you can increase the lifetime value with accessories, but are more specific by trade or less lucrative segments within that, total addressable market.
I love it. I love the answer. If I put my Shark Tank hat on and ask, how many of these have you sold? Do you know?
Yep, we have a couple 100,000 in the field now with it. So we started manufacturing in 2021, and since then have 3 core products with a couple of accessory SKUs with it, but have several 100,000 in the field now. And while it seems like for us it's a proud big number to be proud of, Stanley is still probably making that in a single day for their analog tape
Sure.
measures, right? So it just shows how much room we have to grow into and how much of a burden on us of selling our products is the educational component. Before you can get to these inspirational use cases, we can do this, contractors, construction workers are as stubborn as they come, right? There's a lot of pride in doing things the way they have been doing with it, a sense of accomplishment of, doing their work with it, and, how to shift that focus of, you can use our tools to enhance your skills and ability now, bring new people on the job site to deal with the, labor shortages everyone is facing with it, and get your core work done faster. That again, unless you're a surveyor, like no one is making money from measuring, you're making money from applying your trade to something with it. So I think that educational component is a big aspect of expansion and getting into the field later on, and just represents how much more we need to start hitting these orders of magnitude before we can say we're making millions of these per year to customers across the globe.
I love it. So I want to get in the weeds a little bit about the tape measure itself. You threw it. I love that. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think you throw a tape measure for multiple reasons and maybe there's an expletive behind it. But, one of the things that I look for in a tape measure, and I'm going to just say that, like, I'm not going to choose any tape measure. Like, having the right tape measure is really important for multiple different reasons. And so, like if I was to grab a tape measure and it didn't have like that, that wax coating or that plastic coating, over the top of the tape measure, and it was just the inflexible metal, I don't like that, because when it gets wet and then it rolls back in, it tends to rust. And the flexibility, like I don't like it where it's so flexible that when you're trying to measure something at 15 feet or 12 feet, it just flops over. When we look at your tape measure today, how have you conquered those things?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and stems back as well that knowing that the technology alone is not what makes the product useful and remarkable in the environment, is having that balance of what DeWalt and Milwaukee are bringing to the table versus the technology we're introducing. So we've taken a very Apple-esque approach in the sense that there's no aspect of our products that we're not experts on with it, and that includes the quote unquote analog aspects of it as well. So the amount we've had to go down, and I would say close to the invention of the tape measure, no one has taken a more scientific approach to understanding elementally what makes a good tape measure. And our guiding principle when making the T1 Tomahawk, which was our first tape measure, and what we talked about just before with it, it was we can't make a good digital tape measure until we have an incredible tape measure. And I think that really guided the idea that all these aspects you're mentioning, the coating, the spring retraction, the tip, the magnetic force, the markings on the blade, what color it was, the contrast with it, were all things that had the utmost priority in parallel with the encoding engine, the screen, the battery, the Bluetooth connection with it. So again, it's certainly flashier to talk about those things, and something that, like you said, isn't something I think the average person is able to express. But like you said, you look for it. It's right why people buy Fat Maxes and Milwaukee studs, right? Because you hold it and it just feels like it's a better, more durable tape measure. So this is something we've gone to incredible scientific depths on with it, down to, in some cases, the molecular level about how, we're heat treating our steel and processes with it, and really working in parallel with manufacturers to we're printing things on tape measures that were never done before, right? It is quite, one of the reasons why our tape measures are taking off is because there's not a good and accurate way to get linear measurements up to 25 feet, where we have one of the most accurate and inexpensive linear encoders ever developed with it. So to get that balance with something that you can beat the shit out of, that's replaceable. So if you do damage the tape, you can replace it. These are all concepts that we knew we could have the best digital tape measure in the world, but if it wasn't a top quality normal tape measure, then it wouldn't get the traction it did with it. So that's something we have done, and for better or worse, still continue to dive into, of how do we make the products and something that's very, no aspect of our product is overlooked. How does it, we really, the throwing it behind me is one example, but it's dropped hundreds of times in testing for each product that we launch with it. We have developed several internal machines calibration techniques and things that are combinations of patents and trade secrets to be able to make these reliably in the tens of thousands quantity per year, if not hundreds of thousands with it. So these are all aspects that, yes, ones that are taken for granted, I guess, by the end user, but as you see as well, there's a sharp difference between a quality Stanley DeWalt Milwaukee tape measure versus one you'd find on, Amazon, Alibaba, or wherever else with it. So that's something that we've gotten to incredible depths to be able to generate from the even how to generate. We have a software package we developed and use internally to generate the tape measure artwork, where previously that was something done by hand or an expert scale designer who would come in and draw the scales with it. So these are all things that, again, you take for granted because tape measures are just common, but because of the new technology we're introducing, had to go to incredible depths to deal with other aspects elsewhere with it related to the encoding system, but really forced us to have that there's no aspect of the tape, analog, digital, or otherwise, that we don't have a scientific understanding of.
So the T1 Tomahawk, it has a coating on it, and
Yes.
that coating is a protective coating.
Yes. So there's a protective coating on it. And surprisingly, usually the death of tape measure, we've engineered the coating to be so durable that the death of tape measures is rare. Maybe out of the hundreds of thousands we have in the field, maybe like one of them I've seen where the blade has worn off. The usual death of a tape measure is the tip rips off because you yanked it or it got bent in your pocket, or two, you step on it and kink the blade with it, which is just an inherent property of steel with it. So normally when we sell replacement blades, and we sell replacement blades for the tape measure, so you obviously don't have to discard the $250 tape measure you have in your pocket with it, is usually because of a kink, bend, or tape hook bending on it, more so than it is the wear with it. That the wear is just so incredibly engineered now that unless you're in the harshest of environments, it's not going to cause any problems of wear or erosion over time.
I love it. I've said I love it like 200 times on the show today. That's more than normal. So when I look at it, and it's got a strong holding power, like I can extend the blade and it's not going to flop over.
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I clarify those things because as somebody who has to use a tape measure, 10 to 15 times a day, which is much less than somebody who's actually cutting, measuring, and using it for woodwork, but just for estimating, super important. Here's what I find. You mentioned the Fat Max. I love the Fat Max as a tape measure. I would prefer that tape measure if I was just, until I met you. Now I just use the REEKON. But what I hate about that, and even what I hate about that tape measure, is that even if I get to use that tape measure might last me 3 months. Why? It's going to get moisture on it. It's going to get moisture on it. That moisture is going to roll up inside the band. That moisture is going to rust that tape measure. That tape measures, when I pull it out, I'm going to get rust on my fingers. I might cut my finger on the side as I pull it out. I don't like that. Also, it gets really hard to get that 35 feet of tape measure spool back inside when it does have some moisture on it. So if you're, measuring a brick wall and there's some moisture on the ground and you lay your tape out and it gets covered with moisture and you roll it back, the last 4 feet might not want to roll in. You got to jam it back in, or you've got to carry a towel with you and literally run it through a towel and clean it off so that, you can actually get it back into the spool. With everything you've done, you've solved all those problems.
Solved is a relative term. There's an incredible and a deceptively large amount of science that goes into tape measure engineering. I think a big problem is that outside of really today, just Milwaukee, like no one is actually working on those science problems with it. Like there's a spiraling formula for how do you know how the tape measure always retracts. For a 25-foot tape measure, people forget there's a 25-foot steel spring on the inside of it as well with it. So there's an incredible amount of science, engineering, and formulas that go into making even a basic tape measure. And just because people have kind of picked a design and copied it, that's why you don't really see innovation across it. So some of these problems are physical problems and just can't be solved. One of the reasons why you see rust on is because steel tape measure springs are usually made of steel. Stainless is not as strong, doesn't have the same properties with it, so that inherently you can reduce the amount of rust with it by making it sealed more. Our tape measure has wipers to try to reduce any debris or water that's entering the tape reel again with it. So if you look inside of it, you won't be able to see the whole reel like you would in a normal tape measure because we have wipers that kind of hug the top and bottom curve of the tape measure to prevent some of that water and debris from entering it with it. But it's never, it's an impossible problem to fully solve. Or if you did solve it, it would make it a $200 tape measure instead of one you could buy for $5 in the store with it. So I think we've done our best to mitigate these risks. And then when you do inevitably have one of these problems with it, it takes 5 minutes to replace a tape measure blade and you're back in business with it. So I think, there's only so far you can get practically on robustness and durability. So for us, it's always striking a balance of how far can we push the durability and steady state, and when something does go wrong, how easy and quick is it and inexpensive is it to replace that component with it. So I think that's been our general thinking when going around it, more so than saying we've solved all those problems, where we've significantly reduced them in some cases with it, but some of them are just material properties and nothing we can really do without material breakthrough science to fully solve them.
Okay, so we've got the tape measure. We're using it. It's amazing. And like you said, I can quickly replace the blade. So I've bought the unit. It wears out. Time. Bam. I can easily in under 5 minutes replace my blade.
Yep. It takes 5 minutes, and you could either the T1, that's our current product, when you had the Tomahawk, you replace the blade itself, where you can just pull it out and swap in a new one. The new, slightly smaller T1M, we call it, which is a little bit more affordably priced at the $100 price point and smaller form factor, just based on feedback we had heard from the T1 Tomahawk. You can replace the entire reel. So that allows you to replace the spring and the tape measure blade with it in actually a patent pending form factor. So it actually comes as a cartridge, fully loaded, so the spring is active, and we came up with a way to retain the spring so you don't have to worry about, if you let go of it, that the tape is going to go flying everywhere as the tape uncoils with it. So that was a pretty cool innovation that, again, it's something that people don't appreciate, A, because generally now if a tape measure breaks, you just throw it away, so they're not used to the idea of replacing it, and B, until you see it and experience in your hand, you can't appreciate just the engineering and the elegance of how simple it is to replace with it. But something that, important for us, where you can't throw away $100 to a $250 tape measure. You'd be pretty pissed off if you, stepped on the blade or something and had to get rid of it. So something that we
you would not be happy.
Yeah.
All right, I think I have two final questions left before we bring this thing in for a close. How did you come up with the name Tomahawk?
Yeah, the Tomahawk, I think because it looks like outside of throwing it a lot, it's got the grip on it to, make it a good Tomahawk, very front heavy with all the steel in front of it with it. So the Tomahawk, I think, came out of a very utility driven of just how it was shaped. And then, not that you asked, but the REEKON name is a combination of my last name and my co-founder's last name, where my last name is Reed, and then my co-founder's last name is Greek and spelt not as it phonetically sounds, Economopoulos. So REEKON kind of had that, tactical vibe. And certainly, we were keen as well of making a brand that looks like it's established, right? So it's not, it looks like a logo that belongs on the side of a tool with it, that it has that, fortunately, distinctive umlaut on it and the O with it, but it's not, still has a distinction, which is always great for any logo, but something that looks like it belongs in a tool shop with it, where a lot of times people design these logos and things that don't really fit in place, where we were, trying to draw inspiration from these historic 100-year-old tool brands and have this be, the next phase of tools, while still, respecting the heritage of which, tools have been built on for the past, many decades.
You guys are very smart. That was a whole branding. That was a branding lesson right there. For anybody who didn't catch that.
Slip that in for free.
That was a great branding lesson, because you know what? The name, the way you've got it, the underline with the yellow, it does feel like it's been on the shelf of the Home Depot for the last, 50 years. I mean, I would I would believe that. It fits right in there with, you know, uh DeWalt and everything else that's out there on the line. And
Yep.
so very, very great way that you did that. I love it. I love the research. I love the thought. Nothing was done by mistake in what you guys built. And I love the way that you
Yeah.
approach that. I don't know if that comes from your background at MIT or being a a mechanical engineer, or from what you've discovered in the Army, or working at the 3D printers at Form Labs, or what. But the detail in which you're going to business is much different than the average entrepreneur. Like, the average entrepreneur is like, I've got an idea, I threw it on the whiteboard, I created a name, uh, I have no idea really why I'm doing it. I'm just doing it, and here we go. Versus, you were disciplined and waited for the right opportunity. You found the opportunity. It was an opportunity that you were super passionate about. And then you put all this thought and research into building it.
Yeah.
What, and this is not my last question because I still have that question, but what is it in you that led you to deliver with this level of detail? Was it your upbringing? Was it your college experience, your work experience? Is it just how you are normally as a human being? What's, because this is different. Like, what you're doing here is different from the other entrepreneurs I talk to. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's not this laser focused. What is different about you, or the way that you learned, that gave you this methodology?
Yeah, I think, one of the benefits of being ready to be an entrepreneur when the time is right is that you continue to build up your toolkit. And, a toolkit inevitably means you're taking aspects from every phase of your life and applying it to, the culminating goal. And I think that's certainly part of how I view it as well, where at Form Labs, which was the 3D printing company I worked at, it was very design centric, right? And appreciating just how big a factor design plays into it, design, branding, and of course that stems to marketing. So a lot of stuff I've never done before, right? I've never grown a social media account. I've never done
Yep.
any marketing, but again, you start to learn and appreciate it at other jobs. And I was always interested of absorbing as much information as possible around me. That I think that was probably the first part. The second is the idea of just experimentation is always quick. Just doing it and experimenting is always faster than planning. And I think a shocking number of decisions we make as a company are done with napkin math. And I think a lot of people default to making spreadsheets analysis, and it always winds up being incomplete information, right? You've, I'm sure, made plenty of them before as well, and there are just so many assumptions, and usually those are the assumptions that turn out to be wrong and make the analysis, not that it's not useful, but probably could get to a very similar fidelity doing a fraction or an order of magnitude less work with it. So I think we've taken a very aggressive approach, and I think recently I heard, Mark Zuckerberg say the same thing, that the best companies are ones that are able to try things out quicker. And I think that's something that, was re-highlighted for us, but something that we try to do very well as well. If we're not sure about something, try it out quickly, see if it works or doesn't work. If it does, hit the gas pedal. If not, try something else with it. So I think that was probably the second component with it. And then the third, I think the benefit, and a lot of small business owners have this as well, of, just learning every aspect of the business. So it doesn't mean I want to do everything forever or am interested in
Sure.
doing it, but this has kind of forced me to have a significantly deep understanding of every aspect of the business, which inherently then allows me to, which is the best thing, hire, the pipe hitters who are actually able to execute it and take it to the next level. So I'm not the best designer, certainly not the best engineer, not the best operational lead, but because I have familiarity with these and know what right versus wrong looks like, or good versus exceptional looks like, I think that allows me to, both lead those organizations as well as hire people who are much smarter and more talented than me to execute it. So I think, and these are lessons taken from all over, right? The military, you learn leadership skills, you work with a wide range of people, right? Like, the
Yeah.
military itself as an institution is great, but I can promise you'll find every range of people, from exceptional people to the worst of the worst people you've ever met in your
Yep.
life with it. So that's an experience. MIT, you're surrounded by brilliant people, and you kind of, the first day of class, you kind of, the not really intentionally, of just like, there's so many smart people around you, you realize that being smart alone is not exceptional. Everyone at MIT is smart. There are a lot of smart people in the world. So that, forced me then to take that more approach that I may not be the smartest person in the room, but leverage my resources and be very inventive, hands-on. So I think that was certainly an inspiration from Form Labs. And then, in high school, your parents certainly play a large influence of things, and coming from, something else you don't appreciate until retrospect of just how good you have it and just the standard that they set. And my dad, as you know as well, does a combination of CFO as a full-time job, but very hands-on, does all his own yard work, has a full wood shop in the basement with it. So for me, I latched on to the second part, fortunately. So never got buried in spreadsheets, but still got the appreciation for, running a disciplined business, but still being very hands-on. And, what led to my, passion, which was, continually realized to this day with it. So like anything, in summary, I think it's just a toolbox that you're always building up tools. And, hopefully, I think Sam Altman had the quote that I guess best summarized this, that I always look for my next opportunity to make anything else I've done in my previous life look like a footnote in the story with it. And I try to take a very similar approach, that you keep building on it. And if the next opportunity isn't going to make everything else I've done look like a footnote, or, certainly a cool, remarkable story, but this one's going to be so much bigger with it, then it raises the question of, is it really worth doing in the first place with it? So, that, and, just learning, right? You have to try things out, and still, very, very early on in our journey, and lots more to figure out and navigate before we've gotten to any higher level.
I love it. That's great. Leverage my resources. I love that. I put that in quotations. All right, one final question here. You mentioned earlier in the show, over these 5 years of startup, entrepreneurial adventure, you learned a lot. And I'm just curious as to what's the number one thing you learned along the journey?
Yeah, certainly an interesting question, and one I try to, it's hard to take a step back as a founder and just see, sometimes I'm shocked that Google Photos is my go-to photo storage, and you see a memory come up from not even a year ago, like 2 months ago. Like that's what it, if it's a website screenshot or what a prototype looked like with it, like when you're in the weeds of things, everything is just flying by with it. So it's a skill in itself, and one that I haven't really mastered to ever take a step back and just look at the, pathway you've come along with it and see the progression with it. But I think the biggest learning or takeaway I've gotten with it is, related to how you fund the company. And I think, going into it, I came from a background where I have a lot of friends who have started companies, and almost every single one of them is venture capital backed with it. Now I think it's certainly taken a turn, but when I was, the upbringing was when Uber was coming out, and I forgot the actual adage, but it was, it evolved from stupid money being spent smartly to dumb money being spent dumb. And then 2022 hit, and then capital became more expensive, and then everything kind of went out the door. And then VC stood up and said, oh yeah, companies have to be profitable. Where before, Uber was IPOing without ever having made a profit, hundreds of millions of dollars of loss a year with it. So the, biggest lesson I learned, and was, partly by accident, partly how it just worked out over time, was being free of outside investment and showing that you can make, both a hardware and or software business without accepting any outside capital. And a lot of the flexibility and discipline we can maintain on realizing the purity of our vision is absolutely correlated to not having any misaligned incentives or short-term pressure to do one or the other based on capital or dilution of control of the company with it. So that's something that I think was and still is, for an example, that, oh, I'm doing a startup, like, great, who am I gonna raise money from? Where for us, it was launching a side project that, again, many stars aligned. It did very well. We were able to grow the company, but forced us to take a more disciplined approach. And when there were concerns about a downturn, and we took a, look like everyone else did at our operations, there wasn't any low-hanging fruit, just because we had been grown and bred to be profitable. We have to sell products. We can't live in a fantasy world of future potential or lifetime value. We don't need to overhire for things that are not causing, myself or someone on the team a nosebleed now with it. So I think that's something that wasn't worked out by, partly mistake, partially by luck, partly just by the pathway we've chosen with it. But had you asked me in college or before that, I would have been much more biased, just because of, and that's how startups specific, a little bit different of small business. Startups are celebrated by funding rounds, right? Funding rounds are kind of arbitrary, right? A Series A for, raise $20 million on, $800,000 of revenue, right? And that's kind of laughable when we look at it and compare that to ourselves and think about what our, theoretical VC valuation is, just because it's so out of touch with what actually is going on the ground. And at the end of the day, making an impact on the, industry we're trying to serve with it. So that's something that was always instilled in me up until 2022, when the tides kind of shifted with capital, that if you want a company, you need to raise external capital, take out a loan, get VC funding, and once you're on those trains, it's really hard to get out of it.
Right.
If you want to grow the company as well with it. If you want to stay stable, it's slightly different, and you can grow it incrementally from there. But once you're on the VC train, very hard to get off of it, and you give up something in the process with it. So I think that was my biggest bit of feedback and learning that was, kind of instilled in me and celebrated, to this day in a much different way than maybe what's advertised from the self-funding bootstrapped route.
Incredible. Free of outside investment. I think that's a great lesson for any entrepreneur out there. Be free of outside investment. I think that is so smart, so intelligent. You're on social media. How can people follow you and your product online?
Yep. So REEKON Tools on every major social media platform. We got the TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it on there. And then REEKON.tools, REEKON.com will all lead to the same spot with it and get an overview of the ecosystem and the products we have. And
they can buy their products. They can buy your products from
our website, on Amazon, Home Depot, Acme Tools, anywhere, any major place tools are sold, or in the industrial channels of McMaster-Carr or Grainger.
Awesome. If you're out there and you're looking to really just up your game, I'm going to tell you what, this is the best tape measure on the planet. I love it. I think it's phenomenal. It's incredible. Not only do I love the product, I think you guys are awesome as business owners and just inventors, and everything that you're doing is incredible. I've loved this time that we've spent together. If you're out there, go buy the product. Put it in the hands of your guys. You won't regret it. It's incredible stuff. This has been an incredible show. I've learned a lot. I got a ton of notes. It's been so much fun. Any final thoughts or tips that you'd leave with the audience today?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with the construction side, then switch to the entrepreneurial side. On the construction side, there's an inevitability that a large amount of people in 5 years will be using digital tape measures, right? Everyone is having trouble hiring, looking for operational improvements. Digital tape measure is sounds like a simple tool just because of how intuitive tape measures or familiar tape measures are with it, but will result in immediate order of magnitude savings in many industries with it. So definitely recommend something to try out and see, if you're in an industry where measurements have importance to them within the construction field, digital tape measures are inarguably the way to go. And wrap up on the entrepreneurial side with, if you're passionate about something, it will help you get through many of the valleys and low points of a startup much easier than something you're kind of on the fence about with it. As you know as well, Dave, and I'm sure most entrepreneurs know, like entrepreneurship, starting a company, business, whatever, is not for the faint of heart and not something to half-ass when you jump into it with it. So feel fully passionate about it, and conversely, just do it. A lot of people talk about starting a business, doing something, just try it out. It's always easy to tiptoe in it, and plenty of ways to mitigate risk instead of doing it all at once. So and maybe another note, we didn't start REEKON. We were still working full-time at Formlabs while we had launched REEKON with it. So the risk transition is also something to be clear on, of like, we didn't jump boat and just go all in on this. We're working a full-time, well-paying job here in Boston. We launched a $1 million Kickstarter campaign and then transitioned to that company with it. So we certainly had to work 2 full-time jobs in the process of developing both, but it was a way to mitigate the risk for those of you who are in different stages of your life and can't afford such a sudden transition of, money or income that you have with it. So if it's something that you're interested in trying, start the process. And, as always, there's never a better time to start than right now with it. So wrap up with that. And really appreciate the conversation as well, Dave.
Awesome. I love it. You heard it here from Christian. Just do it. I'm your host, Dave Westcott. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, anywhere it's social, I'm hanging out. This has been the Entrepreneurial Journey. We are back 9:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Tuesday. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.
Mike Bott from Frost Solutions, one of the owners of the company. What we do is provide a mini weather station to give you a tailored forecast to those particular locations, so you know where and when and what to do in those parts of town. You know, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different ways that people can experience tremendous value having a technology like this.
Introducing the all-new Western Enforcer V-Plow. Engineered with all the features, efficiency, and performance of full-size Western V-Plows, built specifically for your half-ton truck. For more information, visit westernplows.com.